Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something really foundational in psychology.
Hmm.
Carl Rogers and his person-centered theory. It's quite revolutionary, really.
Absolutely. It's one of those frameworks that genuinely shifts your perspective on people.
Yeah, and our goal here is to pull out the key ideas, the stuff that still feels so relevant today, Rogers' way of thinking. It really changed the game for how we approach growth, maybe even hinting at that sort of modern focus on authenticity we see now.
It really did. His emphasis on the potential within the individual was and still is incredibly powerful. As we talk through this, maybe think about how these ideas land for you in your own experience.
Okay, so let's unpack this. The material we looked at draws this really interesting contrast. You got Freud, maybe like a detective, digging into the past,
Right, uncovering
or
things.
the behaviorists, more like trainers, focusing on actions.
Big behavior, yeah.
But Rogers, his angle was totally different. He was more about, what? Creating a space?
Exactly. A space of non-judgmental acceptance, allowing you the space to be authentically you. It wasn't about fixing, it was about facilitating.
And is that where that Gen Z vibe comparison comes in? This focus on being real, valuing inner peace over, say, what others think?
I think so, yeah. He was definitely ahead of his time, championing self-acceptance and challenging those sort of external authorities long before it became mainstream.
So his core idea is, you already have what you need to grow.
Pretty much. That's the radical part.
Huh.
The beliefs that you, the individual, have this innate capacity.
Yeah.
You don't need someone to fix you because you're not inherently broken.
You just need the right conditions.
The right environment.
Yeah.
Supportive, honest, real. That's what allows flourishing. He really did set the stage for a lot of today's focus on mental wellness and, authentic living.
Okay, so it's less about forcing growth and more about removing the roadblocks.
Precisely. Which leads us nicely into that first big concept,
Hmm.
the actualizing tendency. What is that exactly?
Yeah, this innate drive. Why was that such a big deal?
Well, think about the context. Psychology back then often focused on deficits, on pathology or external drivers. Rogers comes along and says, no, fundamentally, humans have this positive inherent push towards growth, towards becoming their potential.
Like a plant reaching for the sun.
That's the classic analogy. If the conditions are right, sunlight, water, soil, the plant naturally grows. It's not being forced if own tendency is unfolding. It's an ongoing process.
That reframes everything. It's not what's wrong, but what do you need?
Exactly. A huge shift. It makes you think about how we foster growth in others and ourselves.
Okay, so if we have this internal drive, how does our view of ourselves play into it? This brings us to self-concept.
Right. How you see yourself, how you feel about yourself.
And the material makes this distinction between the real self, who you actually are day to day, and the ideal self, who you think you should be or want to be.
Yeah, and the gap or lack of gap between
Ugh.
those two is crucial.
So what happens when they align? And what happens when they're far apart?
This is where congruence and incongruence come in. Congruence is when your real self and ideal self are pretty well matched. You feel authentic, integrated, there's a sense of peace.
Okay, that sounds like the goal.
It generally leads to better psychological well-being, yeah. Incongruence is the opposite, a big gap. You feel torn, maybe anxious, like you're wearing a mask or not living your truth. It's that feeling of being off.
Right, like a constant internal conflict.
Exactly. Even if things look fine externally, your internal alignment is key.
So what creates that gap? What pushes us towards incongruence, away from just being ourselves? This next bit, conditions of worth, feels really important here.
Oh, hugely important. Conditions of worth are those spoken or unspoken rules we internalize about what makes us acceptable or lovable.
Like, I'm only good enough if I get straight A's, or people will only like me if I'm always cheerful.
Precisely. It's the if. I am worthy if. These conditions force us to value ourselves based on meeting external expectations rather than our inherent being. It puts our self-worth constantly up for review.
And that pulls us away from our real self.
Definitely. You start shaping yourself to meet the conditions, creating that incongruence.
So what's the antidote Rogers proposed?
This is maybe his most famous contribution. Unconditional positive regard.
Just accepting someone completely, no strings attached.
Exactly. Complete acceptance. Valuing the person inherently, regardless of their behavior, choices, or feelings. It's not necessarily approval of everything, but a profound acceptance of the person.
That sounds incredibly powerful and probably quite rare.
It can be. But Rogers believed it's essential. When you experience that deep acceptance from someone else, it creates the safety needed to start letting go of those conditions of worth you've been carrying.
It frees you up to be more congruent.
It allows you to reconnect with your actualizing tendency, your real self. You can finally just be.
So how does this all translate into actually helping people in therapy or even just, in life?
Well, Rogers laid out what he called the 3 core conditions for therapeutic growth, but they really apply anywhere genuine connection happens.
Okay, what are they?
First, genuineness, which is also called congruence. This means the helper, the therapist, needs to be real, authentic, transparent, not playing a role.
So the therapist has to be congruent too. Makes sense.
Absolutely. Second, that unconditional positive regard we just talked about, deep acceptance of the client.
Okay.
And third, empathy, really trying to understand the client's world from their point of view, feeling with them without judgment.
Genuineness, unconditional positive regard, empathy.
Those 3 together create what Rogers called a safe psychological climate.
A space where the person feels safe enough to explore themselves honestly.
Exactly. To drop the masks, confront the incongruence, and move towards their own growth. And you have to ask, how can we bring more of these conditions into our own relationships, our families, friendships, workplaces?
Yeah, it really shifts the focus, doesn't it? Away from diagnosing and fixing.
And towards facilitating something that's already there, that inherent potential.
The core message feels like the power to grow is already inside you.
Absolutely. It's about creating the conditions inside and out for that power to emerge.
So maybe a final thought for listeners.
Yeah, maybe consider for yourself what conditions of worth might be subtly running your life, what expectations are you trying to meet?
And how could bringing a bit more genuineness, acceptance, and empathy towards yourself too?
And towards others, how might that open things up? It's really a path towards a more authentic way of being.
A powerful framework to think about. Thanks for unpacking that.
My pleasure. It's always fascinating to revisit Rogers.